it'll be challenging, but we can be able to.
You want to wait a couple minutes for a few more people to show up?
Yeah, we can wait a couple minutes. Make sure. I know we're expecting a couple of minutes.
Okay, great.
Do you need to-
No, I'm good. Thank you.
I'm sitting next to him.
Like Don Vito, I gotta go.
There it is. Oh, man, this is fun. This is unbelievable. Thank God I'm having a gun. Thank God I'm not licensed to carry. Oh, my God. Going that well. Oh,
Great, sir. Now for quorum if you want to get going.
You wanna get going? All right.
If you'd like to.
Yeah, sure, let's get going, because
All right.
I mean, not be respectful of people's time.
All right, Maria, we're going to get going.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending the first work group meeting for the statewide implementation analysis for Rhode Island Beverage Container Plan. I want to thank everybody for understanding as we did a little scheduling gymnastics on here. We wanted to make sure that the meetings complied with all aspects of the Open Meetings Act. So we had to go through a couple of steps and had to reschedule, but thanks for understanding on that. One of the things I wanted to do was just welcome everybody this afternoon and really emphasize that we're building off the work that happened in a legislative commission that has met the last couple of years. You know, there was a lot of good dialogue that happened. Some of you were on the legislative commission. Some of you attended the meetings. A lot of good dialogue, a lot of progress was made, but there was more work to be done, I think. And the legislature gave us this assignment to work through an implementation plan over the next few months and to convene an advisory group to get input and keep you up to speed on how we're doing. One of the things we really want to focus on is the idea of what's it going to take the various models that were discussed in that legislative commission and actually make them real. And we're working in coordination with Resource Recovery. We're working with coordination of the Department of Administration to really kind of lay that out. And one of the components of that that's really important is really looking at who pays. And that's not only who pays now in the current system, but who would pay what and contribute what in a future system. And our goal is to lay out some very clear alternatives for decision makers so that if there is a legislative proposal next session, that it be well informed and well framed out so that it can move quickly into implementation. So with that, we've worked with our partners. We brought on RIRRC, which you will hear from in a minute, to really just kind of guide the process and do the heavy lifting behind the scenes on this. They'll talk a little bit about their background and experience, which is extensive. But I think at this point, we'll go to introductions. I'll start off. I'm Terry Gray. I'm the director of DEM, and I'll pass it off to Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Howe, I'm the State Director for Clean Water Action here in Rhode Island.
I'm Kevin Proft. I'm the Deputy Director of Sustainability for the City of Providence.
Jen Thorpe, I'm the Director of Advocacy at Save the Bay.
Everyone, Niels Well, the Executive Director of Rhode Island Riverfield.
Good afternoon, Jared Rhodes, Director of Policy and Programs, Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation. I'm Rich Burbank, I'm the Director of Public Services, Southeast.
Jim Murphy, Assistant Director of Facilities and Operations at Rhode Island College.
Good afternoon, Peg Sweeney, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Beverage Association.
Leo Pollock, Co-founder and Managing Partner of Remix Organics, for organic waste hauling.
Right.
Good. Dave McLaughlin, Project Manager for this activity. So thanks for being here.
All right. So that,
Great.
Yeah. Did we go out of order on a slide? Was there a previous one, Rachel?
Yeah, I was gonna say, we might want to go back to this one a little bit for context, if that's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ronix.
Yeah, so as the director mentioned, there was a legislative session, joint legislative committee that met 13 times over the course of 18 months, and really great thought leadership and constructive conversations, lots of presentations. And what really came out of it was a report by the Joint Legislative Committee that made a recommendation to consider a DRS program, a deposit return system or recycling refund. Also consider an extended producer responsibility program for plastic packaging and paper, and also a combined program. So I won't necessarily read all the details, but these were some of the highlights that came out of it, a 10 cents fee for the deposits, a PRO-based program. What also came out of it was a series of legislation that was put forward, and one was that represented the combined bill of an EPR and a DRS proposal. And that is one piece of the directive that we received to move forward with this statewide implementation assessment, that the combined bill will be one of the 5 scenarios that we're going to be looking at. So, and we'll go into more detail into those 5 scenarios. But as I pass it back, I would just, Director, if you have any other thoughts you'd want to share here.
I just want to recognize that this legislative commission, again, had some pretty good discussions, pretty good thought leadership, like Dave said. And I want to commend both Representative Carol McEntee and Senator Mark McKinney for their chairmanship. They were joint chairmans, and we have been in pretty constant contact with both of them since that commission issued their final report on how to pick up the ball and run with it. And that's our intention right now.
Great. So after we got the directive to move forward with this through a competitive bidding process, we worked and we selected Resource Recycling Systems to be the vendor of choice to help us with this effort. They've been onboarded. They've been on the project now for a month or so. And so really the heart of the meeting today is for them to share a background about their organizational excellence and ability to perform this work, but also the overarching game plan of where we're going to go in the next 5 or 6 months. We have every reason to believe that we are going to finish this by December 1st and submit a report back to the General Assembly and the governor and the various stakeholders. So with that in mind, it's been enjoyable so far, and I can think it's going to continue working with RRS. I've had some good conversations with Jared and the group at Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation to get into the inner workings of the MRF. So, Rachel, I think I'll pass it back to you. You can jump forward a couple slides.
All right. All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Perlman. I'm a consultant at RRS, Resource Recycling Systems. I'm project managing this project, so I'll give you a little bit of background about RRS, and we'll also introduce the folks we have on the call, as well as the team. So RRS, we were really excited to work on this project with you, to be selected to do this work. We have over 40 years experience solving for circularity, materials management, and sustainable materials management with products, packaging, recycling, all those areas. We work on everything, looking at production and manufacturing, through design of products, all the way through recycling issues, infrastructure recovery challenges, and with our policy arm, Signal Fire Group, we've been working a lot on EPR issues and implementation, best practices. We have U.S. experts based all over the country, specializing in materials, sustainability, and life cycle management solutions, a team of about 80 different consultants. And we work with the public sector and private sector. So we really have a great team, including on this project. So you heard a little bit about me. I've worked on different needs assessment projects, looking at also projects related to EPR and DRS. I'm based in Massachusetts. And Risa Domino, who couldn't be here today, but who really wanted to be here. She's project directing the project, an expert in EPR and in a lot of these issues, and she'll be joining our next advisory council meeting. We also have Kate McGuire, modeling expert, and Stephanie Robinson, modeling. And Maria, I'll let you introduce yourself, and also Isabel, who's supporting on the policy side as well. I'll let you introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Bianchetti. I've been with RIRRC about a year and a half. I'm based in upstate New York, and I'm really excited to work on this project for Rhode Island. I was a big part of the project team that worked on the New York State recycling needs assessment. And right now we're talking about what the future state of recycling in New York looks like. And I'm happy and excited to take those learnings and apply them to this project. Nice to meet everyone.
Sure, I'll jump in too. Hi, everyone. It's great to meet everyone, see a bunch of new faces in the room. I'm Isabel. I am a consultant with RIRRC and our policy subsidiary Signal Fire Group. So I'll be supporting the project team kind of tangentially to provide some policy subject matter expertise. And I'll also be giving a brief overview of EPR and DRS later on the call today.
Thanks. Yeah, so we have a great team kind of pulling together the data side, the modeling side, the policy side for this work. Just briefly, some relevant experience of projects we've worked on that might be of interest. And so for DEC in Vermont, we conducted a recycling system analysis focused on beverage container recovery. So we modeled different scenarios around bottle bill scenarios and expansion of a bottle bill system there, looked at the financial and environmental impacts, greenhouse gas emissions, how material recovery and recovery redemption rates and recycling rates would be impacted under different scenarios, and looked at consumer convenience, landfill diversion, also litter. So a lot of relevant work related to this Rhode Island project. The project Maria was speaking about, we've been conducting a gap analysis and needs assessment for New York, looking at information on operations, capacity, infrastructure in New York's current recycling system, and providing recommendations to address gaps and ensure that the recycling systems are maximizing the capture of recyclables. So that project, New York is a bigger and more complex state, so some more complexities in that work. And we're really excited about the data quality of that we've been receiving for documents in Rhode Island's waste generation data. So that's been great. And then we've been working with the Department of Ecology in the state of Washington to design and inform a practical, equitable redemption network for beverage containers. So a hypothetical system for DRS there, and how that could be designed, and what types of like a collection network would make the most sense, location and types of redemption centers. And we developed criteria for evaluating scenario equity and convenience, and looked at different scenarios in that. So a lot of lessons that we've been learning from other projects that we're bringing to this project. And the main goal of this work is to provide case analysis to best position Rhode Island's decision makers, including many of you, as you consider the policy options for extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper, along with deposit return system, or DRS. So those acronyms you're probably familiar with will come up in this presentation. And these programs would be managed by one or multiple producer responsibility organizations. So that would be a new structure, different than how things are operated currently. And I will also mention that we, and a lot of this is what we're talking about today. We're also documenting existing waste and recycling systems in Rhode Island through the needs assessment. So the process that we're taking is there's kind of different elements to this work. The part that we're currently focused on is the needs assessment, which I'll describe in further detail in the next slide. We're documenting, existing waste and recycling systems in Vermont, in Rhode Island. And then there's the kind of the most exciting part of the project is the 5 program plans. We're doing that comparison and the related cost benefit analysis of those different scenarios, and then pulling all of this together to create a report of findings and recommendations. And there are interim reports for each of these stages. So the needs assessment, which we're currently working on for how recycling currently occurs in Rhode Island, has multiple components. So here are some of the major components. There's a state waste characterization desktop study incorporating data from Rhode Island along with composition data from other nearby states. We're putting together an assessment of recycling access and collection methods in the state, reporting on recycling operational costs, recycling infrastructure analysis and end markets analysis. So documenting what is the existing MRF processing, where is that material going, and what materials are accepted for recycling and have end markets currently. So kind of the state of what's recycled. Also a review of reuse and refill systems. We know there's not a ton going on in the state, but there are some efforts, especially in universities, focused on reuse for food service. And then also an evaluation of current litter rates using some of Save the Bay data and other data, including some national data to evaluate current litter rates. So I'm kind of going through the components of each of these steps. So there's also the 5 program plans that will be analyzed. So to just review that, there's the as-is program, kind of a version of kind of what's going on right now. And one of the things that we're working to figure out is how this ties in with the current MRF upgrade analysis going on with another firm with a similar name, but RRT. So that there might be some upgrades, and that may or may not be included in the as-is program. And then the proposed legislation, H6207 and S0996. So that's the modeling the system in that legislation is its own scenario. Then a separated EPR standalone model and a DRS standalone. So just if there were EPR for packaging and paper products, and then one version of if there were just deposit redemption for covered beverages. And then lastly, the scenario we haven't quite figured out yet, but we will as we go through this process, is our company suggestion, which will be decided after the needs assessment piece. And then the program plan components, what will be considered in each plan, summary of the key elements, a SWOT analysis, so looking at strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. Also looking at systems needs, what would be needed to make these systems successful. There'll be kind of key metrics for each of these. Timetables and implementation schedule for each of these. So we'll be looking at these different program plans on a comparable timeline. We've talked about, maybe something on the order of magnitude of 3, 5, or 10 years. Looking at impacts, how does this impact collection, recovery of materials, what's recycled, and the cost benefit analysis. So I know that's of strong interest. And I'll go to the next slide to talk a little bit more about that, but that'll be tied closely to the program plan analysis. So the cost benefit analysis is really translating each of these program elements and evaluation metrics into dollars, as well as measurable environmental and social benefits. So that could include diversion and litter reduction, greenhouse gas emission reductions, in addition to the economic impacts. So, the pieces involved in this, looking at investments and improvements required and the associated costs with these different systems, looking at who pays program costs, so who's bearing these costs and how is this different from the as-is scenario, the current design system. Looking at potential synergies with programs in neighboring states, obviously the economic impact, so the total cost, looking at cost per year, cost per ton, depending on the pieces of analysis, and then for potential savings, looking at greenhouse gas emissions, landfill lifespan extensions, hopefully as more materials diverted, and other social and environmental impacts that we're able to assess. And then we'll be pulling all of this together into the final report, which will provide new insight with these synthesized recommendations for a path forward. So that's the goal here. We really want this to be useful for consideration as legislative session approaches and you're considering different models. So there will be an executive summary, the backgrounds and approaches, with the objective, which we've already talked about a bit. The methodology and study design will all be documented along with the modeling results, and there will be a lot of emphasis on the key findings and recommended paths forward, and kind of the trade-offs and considerations. So RIRRC takes a very objective approach to this. We look to rely on data, synthesizing that data and making well-informed modeling decisions. And so that's what we're working to provide. So we don't have any recommendations at this point. That'll all be based on the analysis and the data we're gathering. So stay tuned for that. So a brief update on the activities in progress. This is a little outdated because this was from a few weeks ago, but we wanted to keep the slides consistent. But we've been reviewing, inventorying, and organizing all of the data. Dave and Jared have provided us a lot of data. So we've been going through that. Some of that's at the municipal level, some of it's at the state level. And we're kind of putting those pieces together for the needs assessment. We've developed a material list to be used in the desktop waste characterization, and at this point we've developed most of that waste characterization already. I mentioned this, but we talked about the time frame for forecasting analyses, probably in that kind of 3, 5, and 10 year time frame. Welcoming feedback on that. And we've been collecting regional data from New England and Northeastern states to supplement Rhode Island data where appropriate. And obviously we'll be documenting that in the report. So you know where that data is coming from. And then lastly, this is just a snapshot of our timeline. So we're here in June. We're in that needs assessment phase, and we're just starting to get into the program plan, where we'll be conducting the analysis of those 5 potential plans. And this meeting is the first of 3 advisory council meetings. Technically it says May, but it moved to June. And then there will be another one in July. So you'll see us in not too long. And then again in September. And there will also be an information gathering session. So all of this will be wrapped up, as Dave said, for providing a report to the governor. December 1st is kind of that, that final landmark. So we could, I think it would be helpful to transition in a minute to Isabel to provide an overview of the current state of EPR and DRS, but are there any clarifying questions in the meantime? Because we'll have period for discussion, but just maybe make sure, because I can't see everyone.
I think I don't see anything, Rachel, so I think we're good.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Then I will hand it off to Isabel. You can let me know when to change slides.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so this portion will be, like we said, a high level kind of overview of where EPR DRS are currently in place across the US. Really a level setting foundational exercise, recognizing that, you know, future meetings will dive deeper into different nuts and bolts. So feel free to go to the next slide, Rachel. So we wanted to start off with extended producer responsibility. And I'll first say that EPR as a policy requires producers, which is usually defined as the brand owner or manufacturer, to take end-of-life responsibility for the products or packaging that they place on the marketplace. So that could be fiscal responsibility, you know, funding the collection management system, or it could be operational responsibility, operating the system. And for all the packaging EPR programs that have been enacted in the US to date, it is a combination of the two. Traditionally, producers will form and join a producer responsibility organization, which manages their obligations to fund or operate the system. Producers pay into that PRO through dues that are assessed on covered materials on an annual basis. And those funds are represented by that arrow going from the producers in the upper left corner of this diagram into the PRO at the center. And the PRO aggregates all of those fees, keeps some of them to cover its own administrative costs, and sends some to the state agency each year to reimburse them for program administration, implementation, and enforcement costs. But a vast majority are going to local governments and service providers like haulers and MRFs, represented by that bubble in the bottom left. So with this transfer, you know, producers begin paying for recycling services that either municipalities or private contractors provide, instead of the ratepayers. So after that funding obligation is met, those remaining funds might be funneled into that right lower corner end markets and processors. And that's for the purpose of investing into infrastructure updates that allow the system to continually expand and improve. And we can talk about other responsibilities that these stakeholders have in the EPR system, but for the sake of time, I'll just move us along to the next slide. And this is our packaging EPR map. So you can see all of our 7 states that have enacted programs so far. We also have a handful of states conducting needs assessments like Rhode Island, joined by Illinois and Hawaii as kind of precursor steps to potential EPR programs in the future. And then throughout this session and sessions before, we've seen a number of other states engage at the legislative level to advance proposals for new programs. At this point in the year, most of those legislatures are adjourned. And so you can see represented by the hatched kind of pattern, they are no longer active. That also applies to New York at this stage. So we are only looking at Rhode Island and New Jersey as active proposals. Next, yep. So for the states that have enacted those programs, implementation timelines really vary. This chart lays out when implementation begins based on when producers start paying into the system and when producer plans, rather the PRO plan, takes effect. So we've already seen Oregon and Colorado kind of start to turn this dial. We were expecting Maine to follow later this year. It's kind of unclear when that program will be implemented, given some administrative delays. But the next state in line after that is California, which is on track for a January 1st start date next year. And then we have a second kind of cluster of states coming online in 2029 and 2030. Next. So each state's approach to EPR is slightly different. So we did create this chart to show how they compare to each other on key elements, those being program model, delivery, financial structure, etc. What I want to call out on this slide is that 4 of the 7 states that have enacted EPR, what we consider to be conventional models, and that represents, pretty comprehensive transfer of responsibility from local government to producers. In Minnesota, Maryland, and Washington, that financial producer reimbursement caps out at 90%. And in Oregon and Colorado, the programs are more concerned with gap filling, so not as much of a comprehensive transfer there, but rather focusing on improvements to the system. And I'll also say that each state has, different goals for their program, which also drive how incentives are structured and which materials are covered. So for example, you can see that California is really focused on single-use plastics reduction and pollution mitigation, which is reflected in their programs, focusing on single-use plastics rather than, paper products, as some of the other states do. Next. Here I don't have a very graceful transition, but we're switching gears to touch on, deposit return systems as the second half of this presentation. They're also called recycling refunds, bottle bills, a couple different names out there. Key is that we have 10 states that have enacted DRS programs. These programs have all been in place since the early 2000s or before. So they've become pretty familiar to most consumers that live in these states, where they pay a small deposit when purchasing certain beverages, and then they can get that deposit back if they return the empty container to a redemption center. Initially, these policies focused on incentivizing consumers not to litter their empty containers. And today we kind of tend to think of DRS as a supply side recycling policy that really supports high collection volumes and clean recyclable materials. So just like EPR, each of the DRS programs have a different scope of covered materials. In this chart, you can see that Maine and California are kind of the most comprehensive in terms of beverage types covered, with Massachusetts essentially being more limited. There are some common threads between all of these programs, which I'll call out. They did all include carbonated soft drinks and beer, which are those 2 leftmost columns. Those were included since program inception in all states. And they all also exclude milk and dairy products. But each of the programs have evolved over the years in their own ways, and many have been expanded to include more beverage types like sports drinks, energy drinks, and others that we have listed here. Next. So each of the states also have their own definition for what a beverage container is. We pulled this chart together looking at those statutory definitions and indicate whether or not they cover certain material types. So all the states include glass, metal, plastic, and a handful of them also list paper and mixed material containers, which could potentially include beverage cartons. And there's also certain stipulations on size. Next. So here we wanted to share another program aspect, which is deposit value. today the deposit values across the states range from as low as 5 cents per container to as high as 25 cents. Some states apply this deposit uniformly across the scope of covered beverage containers. Others, it's mixed based on the container type, size, etc. In general, higher deposit values are associated with higher redemption rates. And that's because it kind of acts as a direct economic incentive for consumers. And this is why many states have increased their deposit values over the years. And this also reflects the 10-cent proposal put forth by Rhode Island's Legislative Commission. And this slide, I think this is our last one. This one lays out all of the roles of different players in DRS. So I'll try to summarize it efficiently. Essentially, the consumers pay a deposit on covered containers. The deposit is collected by retailers and returned to consumers on redemption. Redemption can occur at a retail location or other redemption centers. And there's a few mechanisms for that, like reverse vending machines or bag drop programs. The redemption centers and retailers then send these containers to processors for recycling. And to keep the whole system kind of running smoothly, there is a producer responsibility aspect where distributors, which are the companies that supply beverage products to retailers, often pay a per container handling fee to redemption center operators. And they also have to label the products that they sell to clearly communicate the redemption value to consumers. So I think that wraps up my section, Rachel, and I guess our next slide is just turning it over to any questions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we can have some open discussion. Dave, you're welcome to chime in here and help lead us, since you can see folks in the room a little better than me.
So a couple of things to maybe start it off. First of all, we've tried to represent as many of the key players in this work group as we could. So that's basically how you were included in this. We have a lot of municipal members, and what we tried to do was not only get a geographic distribution of municipalities across the state, but also different operational systems that are in place right now. So you have some municipalities like Providence that does a lot of curbside collection. You have other communities that have reliance on a transfer station model. So we tried to mix that up a little bit. The other thing is, I saw some of you frantically taking notes, taking pictures. We put up a website to support this work group, and all the materials, including the presentations, will be posted on the website. So that is a lot to unpack here, and we understand you can't always do that on the fly. So you're welcome to take a look at that material and then really kind of digest it at your own pace as well. So with that, I'll kind of open it up. Jed, go ahead.
So thank you. Jed Thorpe with Save the Bay. I have a few questions, but I'll just do like a couple at a time so I don't hog the whole conversation. I think it was Izzy who just did some slides on other EPR systems, other DRS systems. I just wanted to clarify on, I think it was the last slide, you showed kind of the different players in the system. And the bullet points that you have listed under distributors, we don't have a category here for producers or bottlers. And I think we've kind of lumped responsibilities that, depending on how a system is set up, may fall on the producer, may fall on the bottler. In some cases, that's the same as distributors, but I think in some cases, those might be different entities. So I didn't know if you just can maybe speak to the bullets that you have listed as being responsibilities of distributors in a DRS system, whether or not, that might actually not fall on the distributors depending on how the system's set up.
Sure. So that's a great point that within the existing programs, there's just a really extensive breadth of diversity. Each state organizes their program very differently. And so exactly like you said, I think when we get into report writing, we're going to make sure to clearly lay out where the nuances are. And for the sake of this slide, we just we did roll up some and make some assumptions. So yeah, for example, I think there are 2 states that distributors don't actually pay handling fees directly to redemption centers. So, I mean, there's a bunch of different examples of where responsibilities differ across states, and we'll make sure to clearly call those out.
And Izzy, when you look at other states, other examples of deposit return systems, as you pointed out on the one slide, we haven't had a U.S. state adopt a new system since Hawaii in 2002. Will you also be able to look at other countries? I know, in some ways, apples and oranges when you start looking at other countries, but there are some real, I think, good lessons learned that are more recent for some of the more recent systems that have been set up in Europe and Asia and other parts of the world. Is that something that you're able to look at in your analysis when you kind of try to look at best practices from other places?
Yeah, and I can speak
Rachel,
to that a little bit. Yeah, that is part of, we are going to be pulling best practices with, like an emphasis on North America, but also some learnings from European programs. So we are really, especially in that, in this, not in the scenario, which is based specifically on the 2025 bill, but the DRS standalone and the EPR standalone model, along with like the RRS choice, incorporate some of those best practices from all over the world. And part of that will be documented. That is part of the program plan task. So yeah, we appreciate that point. And I'll just also comment on the definition side. We can take some guidance from how producers are defined in the 2025 bill, but we can also look at how other states and programs have defined distributors and how that fits in. So we'll be sure to lay that out, and that's a good question.
Thank you.
Any other comments from any of the work group?
I do have a question. Sorry, I have my hand raised. So, yeah, I'm Alka Nathani, co-founder of Eva Natura, and we're very excited to learn about this initiative in Rhode Island. We are in this space. We are a startup. We are in the space of plastic, dealing with single-use plastics. So just as a question and also some inputs is that you asked, what would be the best practices? We've been doing a deep dive search around the globe, and Netherlands and Nordic countries are very advanced in this space. So definitely maybe doing some comparative analysis would be great. And then as a used case to you guys, want to know that, could you walk through what would be a single-use, like as a used case, like for single-use plastic, perhaps in Oregon that you have studied really deeply. So a CPG, for example, let's say Procter & Gamble or any other big companies put out their products out there, they have distributors, and now it comes into the consumer hands. Does the CPG also have the same liability? Because I don't see them in this, chart as such. So it would be great if you can just walk through an example.
Yeah, that would probably, and you're referencing on an EPR program as opposed to DRS, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe Isabel, I might let you jump in here a bit, but they would be considered a producer and a brand owner in that case. And so they would be paying into the system. I don't know, Isabel, if you want to add any other ideas. there to.
Yeah.
Do you have an example, like in Oregon, what did a producer land up? If they didn't comply, what were the penalties around it? That would be great to know because it could vary state to state, but just wanted to know what is the responsibility of these producers? Yeah.
Yeah, so given that all of the programs are in very early stages of implementation or not yet implemented, I think we're going to be seeing a ramp up in seeing how enforcement does play out across the different states. I can say that in Oregon, they've released a list of producers that they believe not to be compliant with the program, meaning producers that are not registered with the PRO. And so it's partially part of the PRO's responsibility to try to identify the producers that have obligations that haven't met them, and then feed that information to the state, and the state takes enforcement actions as they see fit. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, gives a little context to it. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Kevin?
On this slide, actually, this might be obvious to others in the room. I'm kind of coming into this new, but we are going to be collecting money under the umbrella of this producer responsibility organization. Who decides how that money goes out to these different yellow circles, and like in what amounts and what for? Like when does that get decided, and who's responsible for deciding?
Yeah, overall the program planning stage. And there's of course going to be some element of statutory guidance here. So like for example, in Minnesota, where reimbursement is capped at 90%, that will be reflected in the program plan. The program plan is ultimately created by the producer responsibility organization. It's submitted for review by the state agency as well as the advisory council as kind of an extension of that governance structure. And then as feedback is given, it's revised and ultimately approved for implementation.
And what entity typically, where does that producer responsibility organization come from? Is that like an existing nonprofit or firm that we would contract with, or?
It's created by producers. So producers come together to manage their obligations under the law. In the US so far, we have one dominant PRO, which is Circular Action Alliance. And they have become the producer in every state that has selected a producer responsibility organization. So, you know, it's kind of unique. In different states like Maine, the PRO is contracted directly to the state. In subsequent programs that have passed, that's not the structure that they've chosen. So there's different ways to set up those relationships. And I think that's something that we'll also dive into in our analysis.
But the PRO is like an industry group?
Yeah, it's a nonprofit organization.
Where the producers pay into the PRO.
Thing to add is usually in these systems, there's a regulatory foundation underneath it that the state usually implements. So that's the regulatory requirements on the producers and the producer responsibility to produce that plan. It gets reviewed, it gets approved or amended, and then it gets implemented. And so there's that kind of that structure underneath the whole system to make sure it happens.
And Terry, is there any industry, like is there another example that has a similar structure to that?
Well, we have one in Rhode Island right now for paint recycling, right? And in that case, the paint manufacturers have come together and created a PRO called Paint Care. And then Paint Care is in charge of collecting and then spending an advanced recycling fee that's charged when you purchase paint.
Yeah.
But they have an operating plan that was submitted by DEM. Okay. So that's a good, yes, super.
And there's often an advisory council, like similar to this group, that functions with the PRO, which can be like stipulated, in a law. So there can be that kind of external body reviewing things.
Thank you.
Those kind of nuts and bolts are an important part of this analysis, is exactly how that sort of gets set up, laid out. That would be a critical part of any kind of enabling legislation that the General Assembly considered.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions or points? Go ahead, Jim.
The question about cost benefit analysis, I guess a question and then a comment. My question is, will that cost benefit analysis be costs and benefits to the state as a whole? Or will it be broken down into costs and benefits to different affected parties? So for example, costs and benefits of a DRS system are going to be different for, if you're a beverage company versus if you're an individual consumer. So will that analysis kind of break down costs and benefits for different players? And then my comment, before you answer that, is obviously like calculating, a cost to a retailer is one thing, but calculating environmental costs or environmental benefits is often a very tricky enterprise. Like I don't know how you put a dollar value on a reduced number of littered beverage containers, for example. I don't know how you put a price tag on that. So I don't know if you can speak to the challenges of calculating like real world dollar costs versus environmental costs or benefits that are a little bit harder to calculate.
Sure. Yeah. To your first question, our goal is wherever possible to have the cost benefits or the costs, for instance, delineated by stakeholder or entity, so by the player in the system. And in some cases, it might be a group of two stakeholders, dependent, especially if there are some nitty-gritty elements of a policy where it would have to be decided in regulation or something like that. But yeah, so the goal in a lot of this is to shift financial responsibility from these policies away from municipalities, although in Rhode Island the situation is a little different of how municipalities are paying into the system for recycling. It works a little bit different in Rhode Island, but yeah, so by player wherever possible, but there will also be an overall system cost. So like that will be also a comparative metric. And then on the benefits and the environmental side, in many cases we have found it can be helpful to leave the environmental impacts or environmental savings like as their own comparative metrics. So in CO2 equivalents or in litter reductions expected in tons, with a new program, or with anticipated changes in jobs. So often we do leave those metrics kind of as is, and we can represent that with different visualizations of, sometimes they aren't compared apples to apples, but then we do have the cost and revenue anticipated kind of as a common metric. So yeah, as far as translating those into dollars, we'll continue to have that conversation, but it may not be the most helpful.
Thank you. Great. Kind of running against time here. Any other final thoughts? All right. I just want to thank everybody for coming. I want to say that we'll be meeting July 14th. July 14th to do a status check on where we are and get any feedback at that point. Keep an eye on the website. We'll put that out to everybody with the link. And thank you.
Any homework, Terry?
No homework.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, Maria.
Thank you.
Isabella. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
It's.